So I don't usually tend to make videos like this. Most of my videos are pretty much just specifically guide-based, but this is a topic that I've been very passionate about for a very long time, and just something I kind of felt like talking about and figured, why not make a video about it? So this is going to be very rambly. Let's have some random gameplay in the background, but DMG made a post today on Twitter responding to basically feedback on the Choir of One bugs slash nerfs that are going to be coming, and he said this. He said in terms of why do they have to nerf it, right? Or why do they have to change it? And he said, gotta think long term. New episode, to activity, new dungeon, new insert whatever activity here was too easy. Choir of One ripped the boss to shreds. It's fun to be OP, but it's also fun to feel challenged. Finding the balance is a tricky thing. And again, that first part, whatever, I can agree with that, but that's not the part I'm really interested in. It's that final part that I feel like is something, again, I'm personally very passionate about because I could not possibly agree more in terms of it's fun to have a challenge in the game, right? And for some people, maybe that's not the case, but there are some people that enjoy, playing the game, having a challenge, and having something to strive for, right? In terms of making things difficult. People will always give the feedback of like, well, if you don't want it, you don't have to use it, etc., etc. But that also, I still feel like defeats some of the purpose of the challenge and fun in the game because part of the fun of overcoming a challenge is in finding the thing that helps you overcome said challenge. Now, again, if this answer is the same for every single activity, I feel like that kind of removes part of the fun. It removes part of the knowledge, the theory behind it. The like, okay, this situation, this is going to be good. This situation, this other thing is going to be good. That removes a portion of the fun. Now, again, I'm not going to say that's true for everyone, but there are portions of the community, myself included, that do enjoy that type of thing. And again, I'm not asking for every single piece of content to be incredibly challenging or nothing to be strong. We've seen situations where nothing really stood out, like year one Destiny 2, everything was just very vanilla, double primaries, blah blah blah. The movement was incredibly slow. Like that's definitely not what we want to see either. And I do think they've done a pretty good job in terms of the whole artifact idea and meta's kind of shifting. Again, buffs and nerfs. It makes the game fresh and change between season over season or maybe even multiple times a season in terms of buffing things and nerfing things to different levels, so different things become interesting, and the answers to your, what should I use here question becomes different in terms of, what is actually the best, or what is, maybe the most consistent or flexible, or whatever you are looking for in any given situation. Now, part of this that I don't feel like is usually talked about or covered as much either is the side of, having your time respected or having rewards that feel good for what you're doing, right? And I've seen some people mention this exotic mission is long or difficult, but I think the overarching opinion of most people is this exotic mission so far, there's multiple weeks and we're going to see what's going on in the future, is not too bad. It's your average exotic mission. It's so if you did it solo, I think it's a solid challenge, nothing insane, but solid challenge. If you did it in a group of three, I think it's pretty easy. But the point is if you get the best exotic in the game, I'm not even saying that's what this is, but if you did get the best weapon in the game from an activity that isn't really all that difficult and takes 20-30 minutes, let's just say, how do you come back from that, right? Like how do you make a really difficult GM feel rewarding? How do you make a raid feel rewarding? How do you make even dungeons feel rewarding? How do you make another exotic mission feel rewarding? How do you make anything else feel rewarding if this is that rewarding, for 20, 30 minutes of something that's not that difficult, right? So that's something that I feel like is important to touch on in general, right? And you could answer that by saying, oh, just make the next thing just as good or even better, right? But then again, then you just have power creep into oblivion, which again, let's just say you say that that's fine, right? But then you go back to, how do you have challenge? And then the answer to that could be, okay, now you make all the enemies more difficult. You make activities that are balanced around the new power strength, right? The level of weapons that we're getting, which is a possible and legitimate answer that some games do, and honestly, even Destiny has done to an extent when it comes to, making the whole new race in final shape, be a lot more threatening, be a lot more difficult. Bosses have a lot more health just because we do a lot more damage, all that type of stuff. Pushing the game in a more difficult direction because we have a lot more strong options. But the problem then with that becomes you have the issue where things are basically balanced around those things, right? And if you don't have those things or don't want to use them for whatever reason, some of the rest of the game gets left behind. And now that is a more, I think everything I've said so far is kind of straightforward, and there's not a whole lot of room for interpretation, but there definitely is an argument for, okay, if there's a new strong thing that is the best, like, okay, we need to go ahead and go get it, right? Like, and I think that's a pretty reasonable and fair argument that I don't really have much against to say. Again, other than what we've already talked about in terms of, the difficulty aspect or the time aspect. Like, I actually personally don't mind the idea of, new things coming out that are better than the old things. It kind of allows for a natural sunsetting, if you will. Bungie, of course, kind of had that enforced sunsetting for a little bit of time, got a lot of blowback on that, went back on it, and then, the new sunsetting that's a little more obvious to most people probably is, either the new rolls on a bunch of weapons, like even stuff like the Into the Light weapons, but also the addition of origin traits on a lot of the weapons when they are bringing them back. Most of the weapons, if not all, maybe not all, no, not most of the weapons, because I think even Trials had like origin traits, but then they brought back new perks on them. But origin traits versus no origin trait, it gives you an extra perk, but then also just refreshing loot pools that have some of the newer and better and again kind of power crept perks allows for a sort of natural sunsetting where again you use the old stuff? Yes. Should you use the old stuff? Up to you. If you enjoy it, but like there is a legitimate stronger option that is the same weapon just with better perks or an extra perk in the way of origin traits. So it kind of allows you to still play the way you want to, but it's like, hey, maybe you should think about getting this new thing. Now, the one thing I will say on the idea of kind of the natural power creep type of idea, and again balancing towards those new options and new weapons, is it does start pushing the idea of like, oh, you have to have this, or oh, you have to have X, Y, or Z thing to run this, or you have to have X, Y, or Z thing to beat this other thing. And that's again, a slightly separate topic, but I think is close enough to this topic to talk about, and something I'm also very passionate about as someone that does a lot of raids and does a lot of sherping, a lot of teaching. And the point to make there is that loot roles and loot itself is a lot more overrated than people will give you credit for or give it credit for. And again, that's not to say that there aren't things that are clearly, best in class, that there aren't things that are clearly better than other options. If you're running 2 auto rifles and a machine gun for a boss fight, and that's probably not the best. You're running a sword against the witness, it's probably not, there's some very clear options that are like, no, this is not good. But there's not really going to be very much of a difference between a 2 out of 5 roll and a 5 out of 5 roll in 99% of PvE content. There's a couple situations where I'd argue, okay, this is pretty meaningful here, or this is pretty meaningful there, but for the most part, it's not going to matter. And I guarantee that there is, again, 99.8% of PvE activities, and the only reason I even put 0.8 is because I feel like some of the Pantheon week 4 stuff for the first time, and and maybe the other part of the point too would be like day 1 rating, contest rating. Those are like the only 2 situations where I'd say like, okay, like the couple percent difference here or there could make the difference, right? All the other situations, it's really not. Like, you're just doing a run at a normal raid. We don't got to ask people to have the perfect loadout. You don't. Like, I think, again, a lot of the issue with loot and the balance of loot and, what is rewarding, what's not rewarding, like, all that type of stuff really doesn't necessarily come from buffs and nerfs and, like, what Bungie's doing and kind of the first part of what we talked about. It just comes from either an inaccurate mindset or just a, I guess, elitist mindset of like, if you don't have what I have, or if you can't do the damage that I can do, then you can't be here type of thing. And for me, again, I feel like that's like the least important thing in a raid or dungeon setting is like how much damage you can do. Like, yes, don't get me wrong, it's important. Like, yes, somebody needs to do the damage. You need to do enough damage to kill these bosses. But like most of the time, like I argue like your averagely experienced team in almost every single raid encounter that exists in the game is going to be able to kill said boss in less phases than it enrages in. Like, so like if it's like a 3 phase enrage, or if it's a 3 phase enrage, you're gonna kill it in 2. If it's a 4 phase enrage, you're gonna kill it in maybe still 2 or 3. Like you have so much extra damage than what you actually need. The real thing to actually be talking about in those cases is, the wanting and willingness to teach, the wanting and willingness, very importantly, to learn and communicate, and, that side of things is very important. Again, I feel like that does tie into this conversation just because, again, like people that's another part of this issue, right? Of like, Choir One or anything like that becomes quote unquote OP or too strong, or they, again, more just in general of like, oh, why do they ever need to nerf things? Is, again, that idea of, oh, now if this is the best, you have to have it, otherwise you can't play with me. The D1 Galahorn problem, which again, to me, wasn't actually a problem. The RNG of it and the complete randomness of it was probably a problem, but the strength of it I don't think was a problem. That was a community-made problem by people saying, well, we got to have 6 Galahorns to take down Crota. Like, no, you don't. Like, if like 2 people had Galahorn, it was basically the same as having 6 people with Galahorn, and there are other options, that could hit it as well. Like, yes, that was the easiest option, the best, but like, again, I don't know. My point on this part is, as a community, I feel like again, both sides, we need to do better on the teaching side, and people need to be willing to, answer a few questions. And, if it takes an extra 5 minutes to kill something, to kill a boss, to finish an encounter, that's not the end of the world. Like, we don't got to rush it that hard. Like, if you don't have 5 minutes to, take an extra rotation on something, I don't believe you, I guess is my point there. But on the other side, for sure, and just as importantly, if not more importantly, at least from my own personal biases, we got to be willing to learn. We got to be willing to communicate what we do or don't know. And again, we just got to do a good job on that side so that, again, if we are not having as strong a loop, but we're doing a better job of, learning the encounters and going on there. Because again, that to me, long story short, buffs, nerfs, all that stuff, the challenge, it matters, it's important, but at the end of the day, the thing that matters the most, 2 things that matter the most, are A, well, first and foremost, having a good time and enjoying what you're doing, but B, also, being part of, the activities that you're doing, right? Like, to me, it just doesn't make sense to run activities that you're not enjoying. Now, again, I think that's where it ties in a little bit in terms of going back to the whole, like, seasonal changes and, the meta shifting and buffs and nerfs, and why people maybe don't like that so much is because it makes people feel like, they constantly have to get new stuff. And again, for some people, they love that. For some people, they don't like that. And again, I feel like the answer there is, like, you don't have to get these things. You don't have to have literally best in slot, 3% more damage than the other thing type of weapons to be able to do things. And again, you don't have to have those things, and I think it's ridiculous to ask for those things, again, unless you are doing like low man, the absolute hardest content that the game has maybe ever seen with like Week 4 Pantheon stuff, or like, again, day 1 contest rating, like very small, like not even 1% of the game's activities. Like, GMs are not in this conversation. Regular raids are not in this conversation. Master raids are not in this conversation. Like, you do not need perfect, like, 0.1% loadouts to do any of those things. Much more focus on the communication, the teamwork, and the knowledge side will get you a lot further. And again, just, I think focusing on those things will make it less of a problem. If things get buffed, if things get nerfed, people don't feel as bad, if they don't want to, if they, if the new that the new OP thing is, in an activity they don't want to do or don't really enjoy, they don't feel so pressured to do it. Or, the other side, people won't pressure people into, feeling that they have to get this other thing just to play this other activity that they do want to do. Like, you don't. Like, I promise you don't have to do that. I promise you don't have to ask people of that. Well, as I warned at the beginning of this video, it was rambly. It kind of went on a slightly sideways topic, but again, I do feel like it was important to touch on during this video as well. But if you enjoy this type of video, I definitely have thoughts on Destiny. Again, I still enjoy and love the game myself, but there's ups, there's downs. There's not a huge amount of things to like personally like make guides on. Like I thought about making a guide on the exotic mission, but by the time I got what I gotten around to it, it's like meh. Like maybe in the future weeks if there's some new things, I'll make some guides on that. But I still enjoy just talking Destiny and having a community that enjoys Destiny around me or just has thoughts on Destiny and wants to see it be the best it can be. So if you like this type of video, let me know. Might make some more similar things in the future that are less guide and more just me chatting and us having this kind of conversation. And as always, thank you so much for watching and have a wonderful day.